I was roughly about 18 or 19 years old, so almost 13 years ago now. My friend at the time asked me if I wanted to go ghost hunting with him in this other group, one of the members he was trying to get to know on a closer level. At the time, I had nothing to do, so I agreed. The first place we went to was a cemetery. My friend and I get there, the other people were already there. There was a lesbian couple who were the lead of the group, despite us being super nice. The guy who was excited to do this, the girl who looked like she wants to be anywhere else but there, and the girl my friend was interested in. We spent a good hour in the cemetery, and nothing really happened. My friend says that he felt like someone was watching us. I don't believe him because the couple brought ghost hunting gear and nothing popped. On top of the fact that I think he was just trying to impress the girl. We eventually leave and go to the next place. The next place was... I don't even know what to call it. It looked like it could have been a church or a meeting hall. The biggest thing about it was that whatever it was burnt down and abandoned. You would think not much remained, but it was such an old building that it was made out of cement bricks, so only the flooring, ceiling, and windows were gone. Though the real frightening thing about the building was the fact that it was so far out from the city that it was a place where people went to use drugs. Along with the gear, we also had some form of self-defense, just in case, before making our way in. Immediately, we had to be careful going in, as there were random syringes laying around. The ground inside was dirt, stone, and the old wood flooring looked stumped into the ground with trash, debris, and needles scattered about. There were no interior walls in this building, but you could look to the ground and see where the walls would have been. The ghost hunting gear the couple had was acting weird. Not that it was picking something up, that it wasn't turning on at all. All 3 pieces they brought didn't work, so we would just relied on an old tape recorder that my friend brought that did work. We set it up in the middle of the building and went about our ways. We spent about 30 minutes there, but it felt longer, mainly because I was worried that a drug addict would show up. But as time went on, the sky would get darker and darker, specifically over the main room of the building. Me, my friend, the girl he liked, and the girl that didn't want to be there were on the edge of the main room, when the girl who didn't want to be there let out a yell. Everyone's attention turned to her as she moved her arm to look at the back of it. On the back of her arm was this large, bright red, 4-finger scratch mark. We decided to call it there and leave after that, along with sense of uneasiness that we're all feeling. As we left the building, the looming darkness overhead was gone and replaced by the night sky. We regrouped in the parking lot of a Carl's Jr. and went over everything. While getting everything together, we all talked about how we had this heavy uneasiness near the end. We checked everyone's hand compared to the scratch. A mark dwarfed everyone's. The closest was my friend, who had to sustain himself to get just barely smaller than the scratch size. The ghost hunting gear then was working again, like nothing was wrong. Finally, we go over the audio from the recorder. It was clear at first. We up to here was clearly in the background of the recording. And the sound wind blowing loudly was heard, like you're in the middle of a storm. There was no wind that night, but you could still hear us. Suddenly, you hear the girl who was scratched yelling, and the wind immediately stopped. I don't know what we encountered, but it obviously didn't want us there. I still think about this encounter as an adult. When I was about 10, I'm 25 now, I was downstairs watching TV late at night with my mom and sisters. Everyone decided to head off to bed, and I was left alone downstairs. I started drifting off, and all of a sudden, someone started banging on our door hard. I'm talking let me the foot in hard. I was so scared, I just sat there frozen, staring at the door, like my life depended on it. My dog was laying right next to me, and he just stared. He never barked or moved an inch, which was odd because he always barks at the door. The banging never stopped for what felt like a solid 5 minutes. but in reality it was probably only a minute. I looked at my dog and I think because I finally moved, my dog snapped out of his trance, looked at me for a split second, and jumped up and ran towards the door. He still didn't bark, but instead started turning his head like he was confused. I finally got the courage to get up and open the blinds to see what was going on, and this young woman, maybe around 20 or 25, was standing there, holding her left breast in her hand. It was still attached to her, but she had pretty large breasts and she was holding it, trying to keep them up from sagging, I'm guessing. She had blonde hair, white skin, and was covered in blood. Her shirt was ripped and her hair was a mess. I remember thinking she may have gotten beat up or was in a car crash. Either way, I immediately went to go open the door. As soon as I went to unlock it, my mom out of nowhere slammed her hand on the door and re-locked it. I had no idea she'd even come down the stairs, let alone walked up behind me. I was so focused on the door and on this woman, when she slammed her hand, it was almost as if it knocked me back into reality. Reality of not opening the door to strangers in the middle of the night. I looked up at her and I could feel my eyes were wide and I think I even started crying. She put her hand on my shoulder and moved me away from the door. She yelled, "Who is it?" through the door, and the girl yelled back that her boyfriend had beat her up and they lived in the apartment across the street from us. Mind you, we lived in townhouses in a cul-de-sac. Our unit was all the way in the back where you would start the turn. We were the first unit on the row, but where she pointed out her and her boyfriend's place was, it was quite a ways from us. You'll see how I know that in a minute. My mum asked her name, and she said something that sounded like something any. Maybe Bethany or Stephanie, or something like that. I saw my mum hesitate to open the door, but after she yelled, "Please help me," my mum opened the door, stepped out, and pulled it closed to shut, but not completely shut. I cracked the door behind her to make sure she was okay, and also see what was going on. The woman, we'll call Bethany, kept thanking my mom and asking to come in because she was scared her boyfriend was going to come after her. My mom refused and explained that she couldn't let her in because of the safety of her 4 kids, but said she could sit out there with her. My mom yelled at me to grab the phone and call the police, so I did. And mom started asking what happened and specific units she lived in. She pointed towards her specific one and told my mom the building number and her unit, B. This silver SUV pulled up a little later and she ran towards it yelling, "That's my sister," and then just jumped in. The car sped off without another word from her or a single word from her sister. My mom looked back at me confused and came back inside and shut the locked door. We just stood there and looked at each other. Asked my mom what about the police, and she said she would wait for them downstairs if I wanted to go to bed. I was too scared to leave her, so I waited with her. Once they arrived, my mom explained what happened, and the officer said she did the right thing not letting her inside. Weird thing is, my dog never barked once until the cops knocked onto the door. They also explained that they've been receiving similar calls like that in the area recently. Even worse, the next morning we all packed up to go to the grocery store, and as we passed that building, you could tell the apartment was empty. Like no one had been living in it. Maybe they just didn't have any furniture or anything, but it was still weird. You never came after her that night, and we never saw her or the SUV again. Bethany or Stephanie, I hope you're okay, if this was real, but if it's not, don't ever knock on my door again. This happened last year, during my student exchange in France. This was probably only 2 weeks before COVID imploded and I had to head back to my home country. That night, there was a language exchange at a bar, maybe 30 minutes away from on the subway. We were living in the outer parts of Paris. 9th Arrondissement, for those familiar. My roommate didn't seem interested in going, so I decided to make this my first night out alone, as I had already talked to the organizers of the event, and they seemed nice. Plus the subway in Paris on Fridays closes at around 1:30 a.m, so I knew I had time to go, meet people, and go home relatively safe. I got there maybe half an hour late. Got my little flag stickers that indicated the languages I spoke, and headed into the crowd to try to talk to people. Everything was pleasant. I made friends with a group of guys, and we made good small talk for a solid hour. After a while, the group decided to split and try to find others to actually exchange languages, since we were all speaking English. I headed over the bar to get myself a drink, where a group of what I can only describe as chavs, but French, started annoying me about the flag on my shirt, the Chilean flag. They threw everything out there. Is it in Africa? Oh, is it Colombia? At first I didn't mind correcting them, but it got old pretty quickly after I realized they were just fucking around. I left them to it and started talking to an older man by the bar who seemed nice enough. After talking to him for about 30 minutes, he heads off. That's when the creepy encounter started. A random guy, mid-20s, early 30s, shows up next to me at the bar and starts making conversation by saying, "Oh, and you immediately wear your flag was well done." I just smiled at him. Then he started, "Oh, the very beautiful talk." As a 21-year-old woman, this isn't my first time in this situation. Usually, if men aren't being overtly creepy, I'll just smile. Maybe give conversation a try, and if they keep pushing it, just go. I said thanks and kept nursing my drink. Hopefully, he caught the sign that I wasn't trying to talk. He kept asking me about where I was from, why I was here, where I was staying, to which I gave very vague, short answers. Chile, studying, near Montmartre. Out of nowhere, and I really mean out of absolutely nowhere, you say something along the lines of, "I'm in love with you." Dude, what? I've directed maybe 20 words in total to this man, and I'm getting a full love confession? I let out a laugh that was half nerves, half, "Are you kidding me?" At this point, he's forcing eye contact. Really intense eye contact. I tried everything. I'm not interested. I'm in a relationship. I even headed towards my last resort, which is saying, "I'm a lesbian," which is true. You wouldn't budge. He said, "Oh, I respect that. Yes, it's not your fault that I'm a lesbian." And he kept going with that considered to be the creepiest part. "I want to do romantic things with you." Excuse me, you what? This set me off on that negative gut feeling. One of those phrases that is just off enough that your brain goes, huh? Not dinner, not a date, not something, just romantic things? Well, I wasn't about to find out what that meant. I put on my full bitch face, going, "Look, I know you maybe are just trying to be nice. I'm not interested and I'm in a committed relationship to a woman." I got up and he tried to touch my arm, to which I immediately flinched and shot daggers at him. "I just think you're beautiful. I want to marry you someday, maybe have kids. You have beautiful eyes." Thankfully, the bar had cleared out some, and I was able to cross the floor and grab my parka. He kept saying things behind me, saying, "I just want to try romantic things." I grabbed a random, non-creepy man I had talked to that night who was just leaving and said, "Are you walking to the subway?" and went with him. My recently professed suitor followed us. I remember him perfectly, wearing a tan waterproof jacket, standing right outside the bar door looking at me. The guy I was walking with was going in the complete opposite direction to the subway line. But I wasn't about to risk going down to my own line alone and waiting. Past midnight, trains take slightly long to arrive. Most train stations have an option to switch directions if you fuck up, without paying again. So I figured I'd go down with my bodyguard of sorts, make him stand with me near the direction change. And if I saw the creep coming back, I'd book it and pray a car came in time. We had an app that showed estimated arrivals. It's just my luck that that specific situation was undergoing repairs, and it was either get your direction right on the first try or perish. No direction change in sight. So I did what I, in my 2 mojito fight or flight mode, had to do. I ran back up the stairs and tried to pay again, except the card I used was one of those cards that once you scan, you can't use again in at least 5 minutes. I wasn't going to wait that long. I could hear someone coming down the subway stairs. Paris subway has turnstiles, but it also has doors that only open once you scan. So I sucked in my breath as much as I could, went under the turnstile, and squeezed through the tan space between the door. I have no idea how I made it past with my parka on. Adrenaline is a hell of a drug. I just managed to make it downstairs when the train was arriving, but as I turned around, I saw him on the sort of bridge area overlooking the train tracks. I managed to growl out my biggest, meanest no. Said something like, "I want to grow old with you, give me your number." The train doors opened and I walked inside backwards, making eye contact and saying no again. Luckily, that's just about one of the most universal words out there. I'm thankful to the Friday night 1 a.m. Paris subway crowd. They all seemed confused, but they had the right spirit. A couple of girls waved me over so I could stand with them until the doors closed, and they went with me until I had to change lines. Let me tell you, I felt safer on the 2-minute walk from the subway to my apartment than near that guy. My neighborhood was kind of known for being a big crack hotspot. At least the crackheads left me alone. So, if anyone takes something away from this, just be fucking mean. Be rude as hell. I tried being mean a little too late and got one of the creepiest love confessions of my life. A stalker into the subway and a story to tell on him. I'm a hospice nurse and had this experience about 10 years ago when I was a fairly newly qualified nurse and had been at the hospice about 6 months. I was on nights, and after handover from the late shift, I set off to check in on all the patients, 12 people, with 4 in small private rooms. The private room patients were the closest to death, bedbound and sleeping for long periods. They had no contact with each other. In the first private room, the old lady asked me, "Was that your dog in here earlier, nurse?" I said no and asked about the dog. She told me it was big and black and like a German shepherd. I told her that it might have been one of the pets' therapy dogs. I knew one of those was a big black greyhound, but it shouldn't have been roaming off lead and, of course, isn't GSD looking. I checked the visitor log and no therapy dogs had been in that day. I put it down to a pain medication and illness, until I went to the second private room and the gentleman said, "There was a big black dog right by my bed earlier." I could see he was distressed, so I said it must have belonged to one of the visitors and it had gone now. A shiver went down my spine. The third private room was another lady, very weak but still quite lucid and coherent. Again, I heard about a black dog. I asked if it looked like a GSD. She said it looked like a wolf. I told her that 2 other patients had seen it, and that seemed to reassure her. I told her that I would be looking into why a visitor's dog had been wandering around. I knew there had been no flesh and blood dog on the unit that day. We lost all 3 of those patients within 24 hours. The first 2 were expected and slipped away peacefully. The third lady wasn't expected to go quite so soon. She had a catastrophic bleed that night. In British folklore, a black dog is often associated with death and was once seen as a sort of spirit guide that led people to the afterlife. It could, of course, have simply been a coincidence. Morphine makes people trip. Often they see animals. It's very likely that these people had prior knowledge of black dogs as part of English mythology. But still, all 3 seeing the same apparition on the same evening is pretty creepy and fascinating. Something I still think about a lot to this day. A long time ago, when I was 6 years old, I'm in my early 40s now, I was kidnapped while walking with my mother and brothers on Bourbon Street in New Orleans, Louisiana. So I have only splintered images as memories of this day, but the way my mother and my granny tell the story, it goes like this. I have 2 older brothers. We are all about a year apart. All 4 of us are walking along Bourbon Street, and there's a walk area with a large fountain. I recall playing in this fountain with all the other kids because it was Louisiana in the summertime and it was hot as balls. I'm not gonna lie, I was adorable as a kid. I still am, well. I'm the only ginger in my family, and when I was young, my hair was fire red, not stupid orange, but that color red that women all over the world spend billions on every year, trying to get dyed in their hair. I had freckles and was always hopping, and I had an adorable stutter. I'll try to include a picture of my cuteness. Anyway, we were walking along. My older brother Jason was in my mum's arms. He stubbed his toe and he was upset. And myself, clinging onto one hand, and my brother Josh, who was 2 years older than me, was walking directly in front of her. When, these are my mum's words, a tall Creole voodoo type man with long hair walked up beside me and grabbed me and sprinted away. She started yelling, "That man took my baby! That man took my baby!" and was unsure if she should drop my brothers, leaving them vulnerable and exposed to pursue. Lucky for my ginger ass, there was a police officer on a horse within earshot that came trotting up, and my mum yelled at the cop, "That man took my baby!" and pointed him out just as he rounded a corner out of sight. The cop took off after the suspects, and about 2 blocks later, the cop had caught up with me in the arms of this guy who dropped me, realizing he was screwed, and tried to get away in a car that was waiting for him. A car chase ensued with them and the cops. Now, depending on who tells the story, mom or granny, after the chase ended, the suspects fired at police, and the cops ended up killing them. Well, they didn't. I'm still unsure. But I was rescued and brought back to my mom unscathed, albeit freaked the fuck out. There was no telling what would have happened to me had the cop not been there on his horse. I may have been sacrificed, voodoo is a thing, or sold on the sex market, or who knows what. A long time ago, when I was 6 years old, I'm in my early 40s now, I was kidnapped while walking with my mother and brothers on Bourbon Street in New Orleans, Louisiana. So I have only splintered images as memories of this day, but the way my mother and my granny tell the story, it goes like this. I have 2 older brothers. We are all about a year apart. All 4 of us are walking along Bourbon Street, and there's a walk area with a large fountain. I recall playing in this fountain with all the other kids because it was Louisiana in the summertime and it was hot as balls. I'm not gonna lie, I was adorable as a kid. I still am. Well, I'm the only ginger in my family, and when I was young, my hair was fire red. Not stupid orange, but that colour red that women all over the world spend billions on every year, trying to get dyed in their hair. I had freckles and was always hopping, and I had an adorable stutter. I'll try to include a picture of my cuteness. Anyway, we were walking along. My older brother Jason was in my mum's arms. He stubbed his toe and he was upset. And myself, clinging onto one hand, and my brother Josh, who was 2 years older than me, was walking directly in front of her. When, these are my mum's words, a tall Creole voodoo type man with long hair walked up beside me and grabbed me and sprinted away. She started yelling, "That man took my baby! That man took my baby!" and was unsure if she should drop my brothers, leaving them vulnerable and exposed to pursue. Lucky for my ginger ass, there was a police officer on a horse within earshot that came trotting up, and my mum yelled at the cop, "That man took my baby!" and pointed him out just as he rounded a corner out of sight. The cop took off after the suspects, and about 2 blocks later, the cop had caught up with me in the arms of this guy who dropped me, realizing he was screwed, and tried to get away in a car that was waiting for him. A car chase ensued with them and the cops. Now, depending on who tells the story, mom or granny, after the chase ended, the suspects fired at police, and the cops ended up killing them. Well, they didn't. I'm still unsure. But I was rescued and brought back to my mom unscathed, albeit freaked the fuck out. There was no telling what would have happened to me had the cop not been there on his horse. I may have been sacrificed, voodoo is a thing, or sold on the sex market, or who knows what. I'm a hospice nurse and had this experience about 10 years ago when I was a fairly newly qualified nurse and had been at the hospice about 6 months. I was on nights, and after handover from the late shift, I set off to check in on all the patients, 12 people, with 4 in small private rooms. The private room patients were the closest to death, bedbound and sleeping for long periods. They had no contact with each other. In the first private room, The old lady asked me, "Was that your dog in here earlier, nurse?" I said no and asked about the dog. She told me it was big and black, like a German shepherd. I told her that it might have been one of the pets' therapy dogs. I knew one of those was a big black greyhound, but it shouldn't have been roaming off-lead and, of course, isn't GSD looking. I checked the visitor log, and no therapy dogs had been in that day. I put it down to a pain medication and illness, until I went to the second private room, and the gentleman said, "There was a big black dog right by my bed earlier." I could see he was distressed, so I said it must have belonged to one of the visitors, and it had gone now. A shiver went down my spine. The third private room was another lady, very weak but still quite lucid and coherent. Again, I heard about a black dog. I asked if it looked like a GSD. She said it looked like a wolf. I told her that 2 other patients had seen it, and that seemed to reassure her. I told her that I would be looking into why a visitor's dog had been wandering around. I knew there had been no flesh and blood dog on the unit that day. We lost all 3 of those patients within 24 hours. The first 2 were expected and slipped away peacefully. The third lady wasn't expected to go quite so soon. She had a catastrophic bleed that night. In British folklore, a black dog is often associated with death, and was once seen as a sort of spirit guide that led people to the afterlife. It could, of course, have simply been a coincidence. Morphine makes people trip. Often they see animals. It's very likely that these people had prior knowledge of black dogs as part of English mythology. But still, all 3 seeing the same apparition on the same evening is pretty creepy and fascinating. Something I still think about a lot to this day. I work closing shifts at a grocery store in a bad area of the city. Y'all hear about the Poland riots? Yeah, my apartment building's door got busted and I ruined my shoes longboarding over broken glass from a truck the other day. We have drills at the grocery store I work for in active shootings and potential lockdowns. We have many regulars who are known for sexual harassment, but there isn't anything anyone does about it until someone steals something. We're understaffed, so it's just me closing at the time. For context, I'm a fairly small person, maybe 5'2", and just hit 100 pounds. I was prepping food for our grab and go when this older man came up to get a sandwich. I didn't know how to work the sandwich bar yet, so I got someone else to help. And after they left, he quietly said, "I came to get you to make me the food, not them." And he left, visibly disappointed. My co-worker who helped them informed me that this guy has just got released from a 20-year sentence in prison for attempting to kill his ex-girlfriend, and then he left again. 30 minutes later, this man came back and ordered the same sandwich, saying, "He just showed you how, so let's get some practice." I couldn't argue there and got to make me his food. Here's what really sent shivers down my spine. He turns to me, puts his hand on my shoulder and says, "Good girl, like how's a dog?" He's been back nearly daily. If I'm cleaning, he says, "Good girl, good girls clean." If I'm cooking, he says, "Good girls belong in the kitchen." It's the weirdest fucking thing. I've told him I don't respond to that, and asked him politely if he could not make those comments anymore. He didn't stop. He asks when I have my days off, and he walks past my station, often waiting for me to the one that served him or make him food. The creepiest part for me is I've only seen him once after I told one of our security guards, and after one of our people in charge heard him make these comments, and gave me a look like, "What the fuck did this man say to you?" I saw him once, and I could have been overthinking, but I think he looked irritated at me. Didn't stop to get food like he always did. Just stared me down while he passed. A solid 10 seconds of stare down. Living with my parents and fresh out of high school, I really didn't have a direction I wanted to go. I would tend to come home late most nights. One particular night, I arrived and went to my room, watched some YouTube, and went to bed. I remember my dream real good. That's a rare thing for me. I forget a lot. I was walking down the hall, through the room, when all of a sudden, I'm in bed with my little sister, saying she can't go to sleep. She's scared. I look around, I'm in my brother's room, and I tell my sister to just lay down and go to sleep. I'm saying this to her as I see the closet doors swing open, and from the end of the bed, something grabs my leg, drags me off onto the floor where I grapple with this thing. As I fall forward, holding onto this man-like creature, all of a sudden, I'm in my bed, sitting up with this thing trying to get it off me, as I can now feel its body. Like when you skin an animal and can feel its muscle and bones. That's the only way I can describe it. It finally lets go and jumps back from me off my bed into the wall of my room. I sat there in bed, confused and freaked out. I was fighting something in my dream, and I brought it with me as I woke up. The next morning, my father was telling my mum that he had a strange dream where he walked from his room to make sure the house was locked. On his way, he noticed something sleeping in the couch, and that just thought to himself, oh, it's my wife's sister's husband. They'd never met before, and he lived in Lafayette, Indianapolis. He goes back to sleep in his dream. As my parents are saying all this, my mom's phone rings. Her sister's husband had killed himself the night before, while my aunts and cousins sat in their living room watching television. I never told my parents about my encounter that night. I think that night I got into it with the demon that was supposed to take my uncle that night as he came to visit my family. I was involved with a guy who liked to play games, lead me on, and highly enjoyed playing with my emotion. He came in my life like you would catch. 6'2", very fit and lean, ocean blue eyes, and he was a sweetheart. I didn't even really notice him when I first met him, but he started to talk to me, and the more I talked to him, the more I liked him. You know how they say in movies, you find the one you're not locking, and it's usually the person right in front of you that you didn't expect? Yeah, well, that's exactly what happened with him. I did not sink. Eventually, we talked every day and night. We also worked together on different shifts, and we would call each other on breaks in the whole "I found the one" feeling. He would come in early just to see me, and I would stay late just to be around him. And after we got off work, we would go back to my place and just talk all night. Sometimes cuddle and kiss, but he never pushed sex. I thought I had the golden ticket. Anyways, things were going amazing until he decided to ghost me randomly. Mind you, we worked together. I'd already fallen in love. I thought that he had too. Of course, when we talked about it, he said he was starting to blah blah blah, and that's why he ghosted because he's afraid of love bullshit spiel. I fell for it, which made matters worse, because I thought if he was falling and we're talking now, maybe we could patch things up and pick up where we left off. We did not, and he continued this charade for a whole year. It really messed me up, and I was pretty heartbroken over it. Anyways, I looked online for advice, downloading the Whisper app and talking to strangers about my problem. I felt more alone than ever during that time, and I was honestly pathetically desperate to not only get over him, but to find love and prove to him I didn't need him, and I had moved on. A guy with an anonymous name commented on a post I had posted and said his name was Pat. He talked to me for hours about my problems and his problems, and we really started connecting on mine. We talked for maybe 2 weeks, every day, all day, repeating history as you can see. We traded some pics, and my gosh, this man was very good looking, but not overly good. He was that weird kind of handsome that wasn't so hot all the girls were drooling. He was very nice to look at, if that kind of puts in perspective. I've always been a pretty smart girl when it came to strangers, so I downloaded this fake texting and calling app so I can give my number out without having to worry about being spammed or harassed, because I could just change the number whenever I felt like it. My friends and family had my real phone number. He finally asked me out and asked if we could meet at a steak and shake that was near both of our areas. I agreed and set a date. When we got there, I'd parked and told him I was in a different car than what I was driving. First of all, the fact that I instinctively was lying about my vehicle and everything else should have risen red flag. But I ignored my intuition and kept on with the plans. He told me he was in Toyota, and I immediately spotted the car. It was the only Toyota in the parking lot, and mind you, it was full. When he got out of his car, he was parked a bit away, so I couldn't see his face, but the body matched the pictures, so I thought, okay, so far so good. I told him I could see him, but for some reason I felt compelled to stay in my car. I don't know why. He was texting me, "Where are you?" and "How do you see me?" and just seemed on edge. So eventually I got out and met him at the door, and let me tell you, this guy was not the guy in the pictures at all. He was a lot more skinny up close. He was wearing a freaking marble t-shirt like he was in high school, and he was not attractive in the slightest bit. Everything in me said turn around and run. I felt bad and thought about how I had fallen for ocean eyes, most likely because of his looks, and I didn't want to be that person, so I stayed and had dinner. We actually had good conversations and debates. He was analysing me all night. He pointed out that I opened the door for myself and sat down by myself, and even told the waiter to partying, etc. I told him yes, I'm a very independent female, and apologised for being. Anyways, we got onto the topic of rape, and how I believed every child rapist should be put to death, and how other rapists should spend the rest of their lives in jail. He disagreed and said he thought they should be given a second chance to live their lives and be remorseful for their crimes. I'm all about rehab in jail when you did something like robbery or drugs, but rape? No, dude. That should have been my get the fuck out red flag. I was genuinely interested in the debate we were in. He looks at me with this creepy look and says, "I'm gonna tell you something I don't tell many people, and it needs to stay between us. We're on the topic of rape, and you say that to me?" Another get the fuck out red flag, but I stay. Tell him it stays between us. I won't say what he told me, because every time I repeat it, I get bad juju vibes. Let's just say it was something like the current Justin Bieber case, but Pat claims he did not go to jail for, and that's why he does not believe people who are accused of rape should suffer. Mind you, I do not believe his story. We have more crazy and heated arguments, debates, the rest of the night, and I realized that I'd spent the last 6 hours talking to this guy in a steak and shake. We decided it's time to go and walk to the counter to pay. But we don't want to end the conversation, so we get in my car and drive off in a dark, empty parking lot around the corner. We start talking about this guy I was involved in, and I tell him every little detail of what happened between us, and this dude really proceeds to tell me that he thinks this guy's family is in the KKK, and that's why he wasn't allowed to be with me. There were little details in that story. I brush it off, was whatever, and just stopped talking. I was all talked out with this guy. So we switched the conversation to sex and things of that nature. And somehow, it turns into him kissing me, even though I told him no. He keeps trying to do it anyways. I was honestly too scared to push him away. I just played along. I was trying to say no in a joking way, hoping he would just give up. But instead, he pressed his lips against mine and would not stop. He then pulled out his uncircumcised thing, which was not small, and told me to touch it. He also calls me by my first and last name, and it freaks me out because I only told him my nickname. He tells me that he saw my credit card, so that's how he knew. Creepy. There were a lot more details with our conversations, but just downright creepy. My friends were texting me asking for updates and etc., and they didn't know he was an internet guy. I was too embarrassed to tell them, so I told him I met him through someone. We eventually part ways, and I drive around a little just to make sure he wasn't following me. My car was having a little bit of trouble, so he kept offering to drive me home and saying he would come over. I said hell to the no. We can talk in my car. After that night, I never heard from him or saw him again, until I was on a couple different dating apps, and that same guy cute picture was on each one, but with the name Ben, Chris, and Brian. It was around Halloween, and we were throwing a haunted house. We were working on it throughout the day, before we were holding the event, which got us late into the night. It wasn't so bad, because we had an event that was going late into the night. We finished up about 85% of it, before we would start to go into overtime, which is a big no-no. Luckily, the event that was going on earlier was done, and it was just closing up everything there. The bartender comes in to close out her register before realizing what we were doing. We'll call her Mrs. H, who's this old Korean woman who can be a pain in the ass to work with, but we still love her. Her eyesight isn't the best and she's easily scared, which will come into play later. We give her a tour of the haunted house, which still had moonlight coming in, so it wasn't completely pitch black. The black lights and blocking out the windows would be done the next day. As we're going through, Mrs. H is holding my manager's, we'll call her K, hand in one as I trailed behind them. Suddenly, Mrs. H lets out this loud scream. Now we've startled and scared her before, because we gotta have fun. This scream of hers was different. The other screams were from surprise, fear, from someone jumping out behind a wall to scare her. This one was a lot more intense. She curls up next to Kay, trying to hide behind her as she looks in my direction. Mrs. K, what's wrong? What happened? Kay and I both ask. Someone grabbed my hand tight, she says, hysterical. I was about 5 feet away from when they were walking through, within arm's reach, but I have to lean in to get to them. Kay and I immediately look at each other, then glanced around. Oh no, it was just him playing a joke on you. He didn't mean anything by it, Kay quickly responded. Yeah, I'm sorry, Mrs. H. I didn't mean to scare you like that, I added. We calmed her down and got her out of the haunted house. As we finish up for the night, you see her holding her hand a bit. Kay and I asked to look at it, and it's red, like someone gripped her hand tightly. Mrs. H said it was probably when she snatched her hand away. I don't think she believed the lie we told her to calm her down. Living with my parents and fresh out of high school, I really didn't have a direction I wanted to go. I would tend to come home late most nights. One particular night, I arrived and went to my room, watched some YouTube, and went to bed. I remember my dream real good. That's a rare thing for me. I forget a lot. I was walking down the hall, through the room, when all of a sudden, I'm in bed with my little sister, saying she can't go to sleep. She's scared. I look around, I'm in my brother's room, and I tell my sister to just lay down and go to sleep. I'm saying this to her as I see the closet doors swing open, and from the end of the bed, something grabs my leg, drags me off onto the floor where I grapple with this thing. As I fall forward, holding onto this man-like creature all of a sudden, I'm in my bed, sitting up with this thing trying to get it off me, as I can now feel its body. Like when you skin an animal and can feel its muscle and bones. That's the only way I can describe it. It finally lets go and jumps back from me off my bed into the wall of my room. I sat there in bed, confused and freaked out. I was fighting something in my dream, and I brought it with me as I woke up. The next morning, my father was telling my mum that he had a strange dream where he walked from his room to make sure the house was locked. On his way, he noticed something sleeping in the couch, and that just thought to himself, oh, it's my wife's sister's husband. They'd never met before, and he lived in Lafayette, Indianapolis. He goes back to sleep in his dream. As my parents are saying all this, my mom's phone rings. Her sister's husband had killed himself the night before, while my aunts and cousins sat in their living room watching television. I never told my parents about my encounter that night. I think that night I got into it with the demon that was supposed to take my uncle that night as he came to visit my family.